All right, you guys, as you can see by the thumbnail, I'm back with another one like the other one. And check this out. Before I get into this story real quick, let me just say this. I told you guys the last time I did my live that I had 5 8-hour days coming up where I was getting my tattoo work done. So that's what I've been doing the last couple of days. However, I'm going to make it up to you guys. I got 5 stories that I'm trying to put out to you guys. I still got to put them in context. I got to edit them and put some pictures in them and get them ready to go out. So that's what I'm going to do. Anyways, without further ado, let me get into this story. It's a good story. This one right here, you guys are going to get a kick out of this one. This one's kind of crazy, but let me get into it. So again, like the last story, this incident took place in Centinela State Prison around the same time as the last story, sometime around 2008. I'm not sure what yard it happened on, but it's not really important as it doesn't take nothing away from the story. So the name of this story is called Visual Implications, and this is a wild one. It's one you're definitely not going to be expecting, but these are the kind of things that happen in prison. The good, the bad, and in this case, the freakishly abnormal. I'm not sure what yard it happened on, but the majority of it happened in the gym anyway. So my source, who I'm not going to refer to as Gato from Lincoln Heights, was there in Centinela when this incident took place. And according to him, it involves several different individuals. Ghosts from Orange County Alley Boys, another Sureño who was only described as being a Sureño who was also from Alley Boys. Gato couldn't remember his name, but again, it's not important. And of course, the Mexican Mafia member who had that prison at that time, Snuffy from Paramount, Barrio 13. Then he mentioned another Sureño who went by the name Panic, who was also from Orange County. He said he couldn't remember what hood he was from. He was from Orange County, but the one thing that he did remember about him is that he had a big eye buster tattoo on his neck that said Mexicano. So Gato said that when he landed in Centinela this time, because he had been there in the past before, that he landed in the gym right off the bat. And for those of you that don't have a clear understanding of why they were housing inmates in the gym, let me just give you the short version. There was severe overcrowding that was going on at one time. And 9 times out of 10, if you landed in a new prison on a new yard, they routed you through the gym. That's where you started off at. You'd either end up getting moved to a cell, or if you were lucky enough to know someone that was a clerk. I actually remember when overcrowding started in the state of California, as far back as 1991 when I was in Susanville. At the time, I had a job working as the recreation clerk. I passed out all the recreation equipment, the basketballs, the softball equipment, the horseshoes, the weight belts. At that time, we still had weight piles on the yards, so I also passed out the dimes. So all day I would stay posted up inside this enclosure. I had my own weight pile. I worked for the coach that was basically in charge of all the recreation on that yard. And this was set up right outside the gym, kitty corner to where the chow halls were at. So what they started doing all over the state of California at that time, including Susanville, was they basically gutted the gyms. They took out all the equipment, the ping pong tables, the punching bags, everything that we had in there as far as recreation equipment. They took it all out until there was nothing left. Then once they cleared out the gyms, they moved in hundreds of bunk beds, triple stacked. That's why I clearly remember the day that they came in and started tearing everything out of the gym. And being housed in the gym was a place that you did not want to be. It was a dreaded environment. It was hot, crowded, dirty. It smelled. You didn't have no privacy in there, and it was loud. Gato said it was wild in there, and you were lucky if you were able to get some sleep at night. At nighttime, you had dudes running around at all hours of the night, drinking coffee, playing cards, working out like it was daytime. That was their routine. And a lot of these dudes used to sleep during the day. He said it was wild in there and he couldn't wait to get housed in one of the buildings. But this is prison. When you're in a situation like that, you make the best out of it. You find a way to get through it. And that's what Gato and some of the other Sureños that were there in the gym with him did. He said he ended up linking up with a couple other Sureños that were solid, and they basically secured a corner of the gym, and that's where all their bunks were at, in one little area. This way they could kind of do their own thing, keep people out of that area, and try to make it as bearable as they could. So Gato said that one night he was chopping it up with another Sureño named Smiley from National City Locals, and they stayed up late that night. But it ended up getting late and then everybody crashed out. So let me just say this before I get into this next part. For all the females, I'm gonna try to make this as least graphic as I possibly can, out of respect for you guys. But on some level, I gotta be descriptive about this. So let me just put it like this. When you're in an area like the gym, your privacy is obviously limited. No matter where you go or what you do in there, there's always going to be eyes on you. People are going to be watching you. People are always going to be in your business. And a lot of the times when Mother Nature calls, regardless to what time it is, whether it's late at night, in the middle of the day, during a card game, during showers, whatever time it might be, what guys will do is they'll go to their bunks and they'll hang up sheets all around their bunks so that they're basically making a tent so nobody can see inside. Then they'll play it off and they'll just say that they're just taking a nap or they're reading and they don't want to be bothered. But everybody knows when you've been in environments like this and somebody hangs up their sheets, everybody knows what time it is. This cat's getting his freak on. He's throwing a puñeta. So apparently this is what Panic from Orange County did that night. He hung up sheets all around his bunk and he made a tent and then he disappeared. So the other thing is this. At that time, apparently there was a lot of good D on the yard, a lot of good Chris. And Panic was on a good one. Gato said that he was twacked out and that he hadn't slept in like 4 or 5 days. I know a lot of you are probably not going to believe me, but I've personally never tried Chris. That was never my thing. I was always a downtown kind of guy. I never liked that uptown feeling. For a brief time in the 80s when they had ether bass, I used to mess with that Yale. That's when everybody was doing John Belushi's. But I never tried Chris, ever. I sold plenty of it and I'll never forget what it smells like, but I never tried it. But my point is that I always heard that the come down on that stuff was crazy. I've heard that when some people are coming down off that shit, that it brings out the freak nasty in you. So Gato said that Panic was definitely on a good one and that when he threw up his tent, everybody knew what he was doing, because he had been on one for like 5 days at that point. He was running around with his high beams on. He was doing that twitch thing with his hands that tweakers always do. You guys know what I'm talking about. Whatever sleep they missed, when they're on that come down and they crash, they spend the next few days catching up on all the days they missed. Then they have a crazy ass appetite to eat up everything in the damn house. And then whatever else they do, like throwing up a tent and then throwing multiple puñetas. So apparently what happened is after Panic bottomed out and he couldn't stay awake no more, he ended up passing out and he fell asleep right in the middle of getting his money. But it gets better than that. This is what happened. So during his little rendezvous, when he was in his tent and he had all 4 of his curtains pulled up, at some point the COs came in the gym to do their routine count. And keep this in mind, whenever they come in to do a count, it's a mandatory requirement for them to get a visual on every inmate. They got to see skin. If you're laying on your bunk and you're under your blankets, they're going to make you move, or they're going to shake your bunk or something to make you get up. This is something that they have to do in every block, dorm, or unit on every inmate. In some prisons, they even enforce a mandatory standing count. But I guess they weren't doing that in the gym at Sentinella at that time. And the reason that they do this is it's a security caveat. They want to make sure that nobody's trying to escape and that everybody's accounted for. So like I said, Gato and the other Sureños that were in the gym with them, at some point, everybody passed out that night. This was the following morning, and this was the first count of the day. This is like first watch, the first count of the morning. One of the COs comes in and he starts to conduct his routine count. He starts walking through the aisles, making sure that everybody's accounted for and everybody's on their bunk. The one thing that I think they do require when you're in the gym is that everybody gets on their bunk and they stay on their bunk until they're done counting. Which makes sense, because if you have guys running around, how are you going to be able to count them? So after that first count, everybody else in the gym was starting to get up. They were brushing their grills, washing their faces. They were doing their morning routines. And what the CO ended up doing when he got to Panic's bunk is he just grabbed one of the sheets and he yanked it down, basically leaving Panic exposed. So now, whatever condition he was in, everybody in the gym could basically see him. But Panic was still passed out. So after that CO yanked Panic's curtain down, he just continued counting. He didn't care about nothing else but getting his count done. He probably didn't even notice Panic. I'm thinking that he didn't, because if he would have, he would have got his eye busted like everybody else did. And then again, unfortunately for Panic, when the CO snatched his curtain down, he didn't give him the courtesy of putting it back up. He left it down. Talk about getting your covers pulled. This story takes that metaphor to another level. Like I said, needless to say, Panic was in such a deep sleep that he didn't even wake up. This dude was in a coma. But the physical state that Panic was in was the least of his worries, because Panic was laying there asleep, butt-ass naked, with a roll of toilet paper on one side of his bed and a stack of Hustler magazines on the other side of his bed. This is probably the one time where people that listen to my stories wish that I wouldn't be so descriptive so that you wouldn't get these visuals. Because aside from the rolling toilet paper and the stack of Hustler magazines, there was a pile of wadded up toilet paper that had accumulated from the multiple rounds that this fool had gone through. Under any other circumstances, this would have been funny, and this would have been something that Panic wouldn't have heard the end of. In good humor, this would have been a running joke from other sureños who would have continuously reminded Panic of the time when he got caught butt-ass naked in the gym after he had been getting his freak on. But this actually turned into something a whole lot more serious that put Panic in questionable standings. So after count, Gato and some of the other sureños that were in the gym got up to go brush their teeth that morning. And as they were going to the bathroom area, they passed by Panic's bunk. That's when they noticed the condition that this fool was in and how bad it really was. So you would have thought that this stack of Hustler magazines would have been adequate enough to get this fool's rocks off, but apparently it wasn't. Besides the stack of Hustler magazines that he had stacked on his bunk right next to him, he had a stack of personal pictures spread out across his chest of a female in suggestive positions. So one of the sureños that ended up passing by Panic's bunk that morning was a sureño by the name of Bam Bam from Florencia. And after they come back from brushing their teeth, Bam Bam tells Gato, he's like, hey homie, hey, did you see that shit? Gato said it first. Him and the other sureños, they didn't know what Bam Bam was talking about. They were like, did we see what? They just thought he was talking about Panic in the condition that he was in on his bunk. But Bam Bam says, when I passed by Homeboy's bunk, I could have sworn that I seen a picture of Ghost's wife on Homeboy's chest. Gato said that him and Smiley, they didn't know what to say. They were both in shock and didn't know really what to do with this. But Ghost from Alley Boys was somebody that they considered to be a good sureño. He was a solid dude. He was the type of guy that kept a low profile on the yard. He stayed out of the politics. He was real respectful, and he didn't get caught up in the drama. And a lot of it was because of the program that he had. He got visits from his wife every weekend, who he had assumed was loyal and faithful. And when it came to visiting Ghost, she was religious about it. She was there front and center like clockwork every Saturday and every Sunday. And most of the time, she was the first one through the door. But aside from his personal relationship with his wife, he also depended on these visits because he had his wife bringing in work. And the business aspect of it was something that went a lot deeper than just his personal relationship with his wife. Like every other sureño on these yards that was bringing in clavo, either they were doing it for the Mexican mafia or they were kicking in a third of whatever they were bringing in. And Ghost was no exception. And here's the other thing that's crazy about Ghost's wife. She wasn't a cop or a CO or anything like that. She was a firefighter, but she was still employed in that capacity. So she was technically taking a huge chance bringing in clavo. She had a lot to lose, especially considering the financial side of it. Anyways, I guess Bam Bam, Smiley, and Gato, they didn't know how to deal with this situation. So a week went by and nothing happened. Then out of nowhere, Gato said that Panic went on another sick one. And while they were sitting at a table, Panic actually came up and approached them with the pictures of Ghost's wife. So out of nowhere, he walks up to him and he's like, hey, check this hyena out. And she's in lingerie. She's got on bras and panties, baby dolls. And like I said, she was in suggestive positions. And then he starts flipping through more pictures and he ends up showing them butt naked. Again, at that point, Gato and Smiley, they didn't know how to approach the situation. But in their minds, this confirmed that it was Ghost's wife. And although they didn't want to get involved, they felt like Panic was now openly disrespecting Ghost, who they considered to be a good homeboy. But again, Panic, he's so twacked out that he doesn't even know what he just did. He had no idea that he just confirmed that he was messing around with Ghost's lady. Whether or not it was just a lapse in bad judgment or whether the clavo had just fried one too many of his brain cells, Panic then openly admitted to how he met Ghost's wife in the visiting room. He basically said that one time when his grandma came up to visit him, that he was one of the first ones escorted out to the visiting room, and that he had got there when the visitors were just starting to trickle in, the first visitors. And one of the first visitors ended up being Ghost's wife. And then Panic said that for about a good 10 minutes, him and Ghost's wife were sitting there looking at each other, basically giving each other the goo-goo eyes until Panic initiated conversation with her. And Panic said that, they both knew what they wanted and they cut straight to the chase. They knew that they had a limited amount of time before Ghost showed up, so they exchanged contact information. I guess they both felt that warm, fuzzy feeling in the pit of their stomach, and the rest is history. Newsflash. You guys need to pay close attention, as this is a classic example of what goes on in prison all the time by those who claim to be your homeboys. Not only do you have to navigate through the cutthroat politics and some of the other political maneuvering out there on these yards, but you've also got to be careful of who you allow to come into contact with your wife or your girl, and just some of the situations that you place her in. Your so-called homeboys are always going to take advantage of every opportunity they get to get at your girl or your wife. Believe that. Whether they try dirty macking, gorilla macking, or whether it's through a situation like this, if they get an opportunity to get at your girl, they're going to jump on it. Just remember I said that. You heard it first right here on Paradigm Media News. So I guess Panic and Ghost's wife started with their little rendezvous by corresponding through the mail, by writing each other letters. And this apparently went on for some time until things started getting serious. And trip out. Either Panic sold her a dream and knew how to make love to her mind, or Ghost's marriage wasn't as rock solid as he thought it was. Because after Panic started selling her this dream, she slowly started to pull away from Ghost. She was no longer visiting religiously like she had been. He was lucky if he got a visit from her every other week. And to top that off, to add insult to injury, she started bringing in the bag to Panic instead of Ghost. And then on top of that, she started telling Ghost that she was no longer in love with him. It's crazy how all of Ghost's personal information got put out there on blast. But what's even crazier is that it was done by someone who professed to be one of his homeboys. So what do you guys think Ghost's wife was doing now that she was no longer driving out to Sentinella and visiting Ghost every Saturday and Sunday like she had been? What do you think she was doing now? It was definitely a reckless and ballsy move on Panic's part, but she started going up there and visiting Panic. No doubt, she's a foul-ass female that had no respect for Ghost. But Panic, he knew better, and he obviously didn't care about the political ramifications that something like this was going to cause him. No doubt, he was definitely playing a deadly game. When I heard about this story and I started thinking about it, she's the type of hyena that gets with Sancho when you go to prison. And then when you come home, you end up whacking Sancho and taking him out, and then she just moves on to the next guy, leaving you to do your life sentence all by your lonesome. Don't be fooled by the shenanigans. Those of you that are in personal relationships, even marriages, a lot of the times when you're with somebody and you swear up and down that this was the one, she's faithful, she would never cheat, she ends up cheating. Trust and believe she's doing it every time you go back to prison. And then when you come home and you take Sancho out for trying to destroy your family, she just ends up moving on to the next guy while she leaves you to do your life sentence all by your lonesome. So fast forward a couple of weeks. Gato said that one day when he was out on the yard, he said he seen Ghost talking to several different members of the Mesa and other sureños who had a lot of influence on that yard. This was something that was out of the norm, and Gato said he could definitely sense that something was going on. At that time, he still didn't know what it was, but eventually he'd find out. So a couple days later, Gato, he's back out on the yard, and apparently he sees this Christian sureño that was out there walking the yard, and definitely knew something was going on because this individual wasn't supposed to be out there on the yard. I don't know if the other Sureños told him that, since he converted, he couldn't be out there on the yard programming, or I don't know why he wasn't supposed to be out there. Gato just said that when he seen him out there, he knew something was definitely going on. And this is the Christian that I told you guys about in the beginning of this story that's from Alley Boys, one of Ghost's homeboys from the streets. They knew each other from the streets. Anyways, the reason why this Christian Sureño was out there on the yard was because this guy was apparently, he was still a rider. Like I said in the beginning of this story, he was also from Alley Boys, and him and Ghost had known each other from the streets. But the whole reason why he was out on the yard is because he apparently heard about what had happened in the visiting room, that he basically caught wind that Panic was seeing Ghost's wife, and he volunteered to participate in Panic's removal. That's crazy. I don't know what kind of Christian this guy was, but apparently he still had some rider left in him. This Christian apparently raised his hand and said that he would even hit this guy with a banger, but that he just needed a couple days to dig it up. Don't be fooled by them Christian guys. They'll get you too. So this obviously had to be cleared by the Mexican mafia member who was running that yard, and that was Snuffy from Paramount. But he apparently approached Ghost and told him that he'd go with him, and that he'd even stab this guy if Snuffy gave him the green light. This Christian was definitely built different. And out of respect for those that are religious, I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm not going to say nothing beyond that. But this guy obviously had 1 foot in and 1 foot out. So here's the other thing. This is how the cat got out the bag. So apparently on one weekend when they were running visiting, Ghost got an unexpected visit from some of his family members that just showed up. He didn't even know that he was going to have a visit that week. So Ghost, he's happy. You know, his family's coming up. He hasn't seen him in a while. He throws on his best pair of dancing shoes, his Bonnaroo jeans, and a 3/4 sleeve state shirt, and he goes out to his visit. So Ghost walks into the visiting room with a big smile on his face, thinking that this is gonna be a good visit. And as soon as he walks in the visiting room, what do you think he sees? Yup, sitting right there, right in front of him, cuddled up, was Panic and his wife. So according to Gato, there was another Sureño who worked in the visiting room as a porter. And obviously he was out there in the visiting room when this situation played out. And later on, this individual told Gato that when Ghost walked out in the visiting room, he looked like a ghost. He looked like a ghost. He said he got pale, his lips started quivering, and he didn't know how to act. He was shocked. This was something he definitely wasn't expecting. But he held his emotions back. He understood that there was still protocol that he had to follow. So he sat down with his family, as hard as it was, and he just tried to enjoy his visit with them. But I'd be willing to bet, I'm almost positive that it was probably hard for Ghost not to keep looking over there to see what these two were doing. He was probably constantly just looking over there. There's no way I could have done that. I give him props for being able to maintain his composure, because I wouldn't have been able to do that. I would have took flight right there in the visiting room. So when Panic and Ghost's wife, when they realized that Ghost is in the visiting room, he tried acting oblivious of knowing anything about Ghost or that he was out there visiting his wife. He just dummied up. I'm not sure what Ghost's wife was doing, but I'd be willing to bet that she was probably trying to avoid making eye contact with him. So following this visit, this is when Gato seen Ghost on the yard talking to members of the Mesa and other influential Sureños who would have been part of that process. So when this gets back to Snuffy and he found out about what happened, he's the one that ultimately made the decision to whack Panic. One thing that I forgot to mention to you guys is this. So once Ghost's wife started coming up to visit Panic, she started bringing the bag to Panic. Apparently, she was sitting on a clavo that Ghost had her pick up on the streets. But unfortunately for Panic, the clavo that she was bringing him was hot. It didn't belong to Ghost, as Panic and Ghost's wife obviously assumed. It belonged to Turi from Cucas, and Ghost was responsible for making sure that it got brought in every week. So getting back to Snuffy, like I said, when he finds out about it, he's livid. He makes the decision to go ahead and whack Panic. And I'm sure some of that was based on the scandalous shit that he was doing with Ghost's wife. But I'm sure that Snuffy was placing more emphasis on the fact that Panic was intercepting Turi from Cucas' clavo. And now, because of everything that was happening with Ghost and Ghost's wife, he also interfered with the clavo coming in. Like I said before, the one thing that you do not want to do is mess around with the Mexican Mafia's clavo. You don't want to interfere with that in any way, shape, or form. It's the fastest way to get yourself in hot water or to see your career come to an abrupt and painful ending. That's their lifeblood, and it means everything to them. So after Ghost had bumped into Panic in the visiting room and Panic had figured that he was pretty much had, he went into full-blown damage control mode and acted like he didn't know nothing about Ghost or his wife. Panic claimed that she had never told him that she was married to Ghost, and that furthermore, she had been coming up to the prison to visit one of her relatives. She wasn't coming up to visit her husband. Needless to say, nobody bought it, and this just upset Snuffy even more. Snuffy felt like Panic was now trying to play with his intelligence and that he was just trying to cover his tracks. Meanwhile, 2 shooters were selected to take Panic out, and a plan was set in motion to have him moved on the following day. Ghost obviously wanted to be one of the shooters, and then to everyone's surprise, his Christian homeboy that was also from Alley Boys volunteered to go with them, with the banger. Panic on the other hand wasn't the sharpest guy on the yard, but he wasn't no dummy by a long shot either. Whether it was planned or whether it was a fluke, the following morning, Panic got called to medical. And while Panic was at medical, Snuffy advised Ghost and his homeboy to go post up by the infirmary and to whack Panic as soon as he stepped out. Snuffy didn't even want to let him make his way back to his building. He told Ghost and his homeboy to intercept him as soon as he walked out of the infirmary and to stay on him until he was completely immobilized. So Ghost and his homeboy from Alley Boys, they both get their bangers and they go post up by the infirmary. And they were ready to hit Panic as soon as he stepped out. But that never happened. As they were standing there waiting for him to come out, the next thing they knew, Panic was being escorted out of the infirmary by the Goon Squad. And the Goon Squad escorted him all the way to Adsay. They took him off the yard. So they escorted him straight to Adsay, where he'd end up staying for a couple of weeks until they put him on a bus and transferred him out. Gato speculated that they did it as a result of Ghost's wife talking about it on the phone, because by then they were monitoring their calls. Gato speculated that they found out about it because Ghost's wife was talking about it on the phone, and by then they were monitoring their calls. Gato said that he'd also heard that Ghost's wife had actually called the prison and warned the administration that Ghost was trying to have Panic murked on the yard and that they needed to get Panic off the yard for his own protection. And supposedly she did this after she warned Panic and she failed to convince him to go to the COs and tell them that his life was in danger. Gato said that Panic told Ghost's wife that he didn't care what Ghost was gonna do, but that he wasn't gonna go to the administration and tell them shit. So she basically took it upon herself to call them. Either way, however it happened, Panic was taken off the yard for his own protection before they could move on him. But here's the cold part about this story that doesn't make a lick of sense. In most of these stories, there's always some form of backstabbing or betrayal that makes you shake your head and say, that's just fucked up. Because this is what ended up happening. Because Panic was taken off the yard and they no longer had an opportunity to hit him, they ended up moving on Ghost instead. And they did it almost immediately after Panic was taken off the yard. Gato seems to think that this is because Ghost was responsible for bringing in Turi from Kukas' Esclavo, and that because this route was now shut down. If this is in fact true, this just goes to show you how dirty politics really are when it comes to the bag and bringing it in. Ghost didn't do nothing wrong. He didn't create this situation either. But at the end of the day, somebody had to pay for what happened, and Ghost was the next best thing. I know it doesn't make no sense, but that's how it goes. So fast forward a couple months later, when he got to Ironwood, he was bragging to everybody that was there about what had happened, but that he was telling the story as if he wasn't involved. But this just ended up being another oversight for Panic. He ended up pulling his own covers this time. Because unfortunately for Panic, when he was running his mouth about what happened with Ghost's wife, another Sureño named Gangster from Canales was there and recognized him. So Gangster, he ultimately exposes him and, excuse the pun, but once again, he pulls his covers. As a result, they finally ended up blasting Panic. They didn't give him a chance to get rolled up off the yard. They blasted him that same day. And according to Gato, they blasted the shit out of him. He said they fractured his jaw, they fractured his cheekbone, and they had to remove his spleen. So Gato said that it happened like this. So after they blasted Panic, I guess they took him to medical and they patched him up. And then when they escorted him back to Adseg, they attempted to put him in a cell with another active Sureño. And it was at this point that Panic was like, ya estuvo. He's like, that's it, I'm done. My life's in danger. And he finally came to terms with his status. There's several things to take away from this story, and this should serve as a valuable learning experience to some of you who are still in the mix. You guys need to be very selective about who you choose to trust when it comes to your wife or your girl. And you need to limit the level of involvement you allow when it comes to your significant other. This story clearly shows you why. Ghost just had his wife coming up to visit him, and even this ended up being too much. I mean, he had her bringing in Clavo, but her involvement was still minimal, and one of his so-called homeboys still slid up under and stabbed him in the back. If you really think your boys are loyal and you can trust them around your girl, then go ahead and continue bringing her around and exposing her to those who you think you can trust. Maybe you can, and maybe she's the exception, but most of the time it doesn't play out like that. The other valuable learning lesson that's been repeated in some of these past stories is the exposure you place you and your girl under when you agree to assist by bringing in the bag. You would think that you were doing something honorable for working for the Bealies, and that this would place you in favorable standings. You've heard some of the past stories. If your girl at some point decides that she no longer wants to take those kind of chances and she refuses to continue bringing it in, how do you think this is going to fare for you when you're the one responsible for bringing it in every week? Ghost didn't rock the boat or do anything to warrant what happened to him. But when the bag stops coming in and people start getting sick, someone's got to pay, and it's usually the ones who are only trying to help. His mistake was agreeing to bring it in the first place. If you wouldn't have, he'd probably still be active out there on the yard right now in good standings. Sometimes instead of trying to make an impression on the big homies and trying to score points by becoming a resource, it's better to do less and fly way below the radar so that you don't end up becoming a target. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. If you guys liked this episode, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like this episode, give it a thumbs down. But either way, drop a comment and let me know what you think. As you guys know, November is steadily creeping up, so I've been spending a considerable amount of time training for this fight. This doesn't mean the content's gonna stop. I'm just trying to find a way to make my days longer and get everything done in a shorter amount of time. I'm still gonna get the stories done, so just bear with me. On another note, I still haven't figured out how to get YouTube's foot off my neck, but when I do, you guys will be the first to know. As always, I want to thank those of you who have continued to support this channel and those who have remained loyal viewers. In closing, you guys enjoy the rest of your week. Keep pushing that positivity and make sure you tap in, as I've got multiple stories dropping over the course of the next few days. With that said, this is your boy B, and I'm gone.